Revenge office stories. At 33, a panel of men told me I was overqualified for a job they were desperate to fill. It was the final, condescending straw in a career spent fixing the messes men made. So I planned a quiet revenge. A revenge that 6 months later would cost them their entire $1.3 million cloud infrastructure and their reputations. My revenge wasn't some grand attack. It was silence. This is the story of how I became the overqualified woman who cost them everything, just by letting them be consumed by their own arrogance. Before I tell you how their world came crashing down, you have to understand the world I lived in. My name is Elena, and I'm a cloud systems architect. If you don't speak fluent nerd, it just means I design and build the digital backbone of modern companies. Think of a company as a skyscraper. I'm the one who designs the foundation, the steel frame, the electrical grid, and the plumbing. Everything that makes the business actually run, its data, its apps, its customer info, lives inside the structure I build. It's a job that demands meticulous attention to detail and the foresight to see a problem months, or even years before it happens. I was and am exceptionally good at it. By 33, I had a decade of experience, a portfolio of multi-million-dollar projects, and a string of certifications most people in my field don't get in a lifetime. I'd led teams, built systems for Fortune 500 companies, and had a reputation as the person you call when a project is on fire. I loved the challenge, the logic, the pure complexity of it all. What I had grown to despise was the culture that came with it. I can't count how many meetings I've been in where I was the only woman, how many times my ideas were ignored, only to be repeated 5 minutes later by a male colleague and hailed as brilliant. The number of times I was asked to take notes or complimented on my surprisingly aggressive approach. It was a death by 1,000 paper cuts, a constant, grinding reminder that no matter how good I was, my expertise would always be seen through a filter of gendered skepticism. This brings me to a company I'll call Innovatech Dynamics. On paper, they were a tech professional's dream, a fast-growing software company with a hot product and a fresh round of venture capital. Their website was a slick montage of diverse employees, beanbag chairs, and inspirational quotes about disrupting the paradigm. They needed a senior cloud architect to lead a total overhaul of their digital infrastructure. It was a massive, challenging project, exactly my kind of work. The salary was generous, and the project scale was the perfect next step for my career. The interview process was a multi-stage affair, and the red flag started waving on the very first call. The second interview was with my would-be manager, a non-technical project director named David. He spoke in a flurry of synergies and leveraging core competencies. He glanced at my resume, a document detailing complex architectural builds, and said, "So you handle the techie stuff. Great. We need someone to keep the engine running while we focus on the big picture." He seemed less interested in my projects than in whether I'd be easy to manage, asking coded questions about work-life balance that always feel like they're really about a woman's commitment. The third stage was the technical interview. My time to shine. It was a panel with 3 men, David, a quiet senior executive named Alan, and the current tech lead, Mark. Mark was the real problem. I felt it the second I walked in. He was in his late 20s, brimming with the unearned confidence of a man who's been told he's a genius his whole life. He was the lead on the current system, the very system they were hiring me to replace. My presence wasn't a collaboration. It was a judgment on his work. He tried to trip me up with obscure trivia questions that had no bearing on real-world skills. I answered them calmly. He presented convoluted, hypothetical scenarios. I broke them down and laid out clear solutions. With every right answer, his smile got tighter. The condescension was thick enough to cut with a knife. David would translate my highly technical explanations for Mark. So what Elena is saying, he'd interject, is that we need to reroute the data packets. Simple. He wasn't clarifying for himself. He was playing the great simplifier, translating the gibberish of the techie woman into something a man like Mark could grasp. I remember one moment with absolute clarity. I was explaining the need to implement a least privilege model for their security, a basic concept. You give users and systems only the bare minimum permissions they need to do their job. It's Security 101. Your current setup, I explained, grants administrator-level privileges to services that only need to perform simple tasks. A single breach in one of those could give an intruder the keys to the entire kingdom. Mark scoffed, a full, audible scoff. We have a very robust security posture, he said. We need that level of access for agility. You can't disrupt the workflow for some textbook security theory. He was dangerously wrong. It wasn't textbook theory. It was the bedrock of cloud security. His agility was just an excuse for lazy, reckless architecture. I knew right then their security was a house of cards. But I just nodded, smiled, and said, I understand. Agility is a key metric. I was there to get a job, not win an argument. Or so I thought. The final stage was a take-home technical test. A standard task, write a configuration script for a small part of their development environment. They'd give me temporary credentials to a sandboxed area of their cloud. It was supposed to take a few hours. When the credentials arrived, my jaw nearly hit the floor. Just as I'd suspected, the role they created for me, a temp role for a non-employee for a simple test, had permissions that were breathtakingly broad. They hadn't just given me the key to the janitor's closet. They'd given me a master key to their entire digital skyscraper. I had read access to view configurations across huge parts of their live production environment. It was the most shocking violation of the principle of least privilege I had ever seen. It was a sign of deep systemic arrogance. They were so sure of their own brilliance, they couldn't imagine someone using their negligence against them. I did the assignment. I wrote the script, documented it, and finished in under an hour. But I also did something else. With the absurd permissions they'd given me, I took a quiet look around. Not to change or copy anything, but to understand the mess I'd be inheriting. It was worse than I could have imagined. A tangled mess of amateur workarounds and security holes. But then I saw it. The time bomb. It was buried in their automation scripts. One Mark had clearly written himself, full of self-important comments. I'll call it the automated archiving and deletion protocol. Its purpose was logical. Run once a month, find data backups older than 6 months, and delete them to save money. Common practice. But the script had a catastrophic flaw. A single typo, a misplaced character that changed everything. Instead of targeting backups older than 180 days, the script was written to target a specific directory that, under one very specific condition, wouldn't hold old backups. It would point to the repository of live, current-day data snapshots, the company's ultimate safety net, used to restore the system in a crash. Deleting them wouldn't be like throwing out old files. It would be like burning the original blueprints and the fire suppression system at the same time. The condition to trigger this was a perfect storm. The script had to run on the final day of a fiscal quarter, at the exact moment the main database was undergoing its own re-indexing process, which briefly changed the directory path. It was a 1-in-a-million shot, a time bomb that might never go off. But if it did, the result would be instantaneous and irreversible. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just sloppy, it was company-killing negligence. My professional instinct was to tell them, to write a detailed report highlighting the vulnerability and how to fix it. So in my follow-up I tried, delicately. I completed the assessment, I told the panel, and I did notice a few opportunities for architectural hardening, particularly around your data lifecycle automation. There's a script that, with a minor tweak, could be made much more resilient. Mark's face clouded over. Our automation is state-of-the-art, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. Perhaps you're more familiar with off-the-shelf solutions that require that kind of hardening. David jumped in, making it worse. Right, Elena, We appreciate the can-do attitude, but Mark is our resident wizard here. We trust his work. We're looking for someone to manage the migration, not reinvent the wheel. They were patting me on the head. The resident wizard, who had written a doomsday script, was being protected from the woman who dared point it out. 2 days later, the rejection call came from David. He was almost offensively cheerful. "Elena, hi. The team was so impressed. Really, blown away by your credentials." I waited for the but. "But," he said, "we've decided to go in a different direction. The consensus is that, frankly, you're a bit overqualified. We need more of a hands-on-deck person, and we're concerned you'd be bored. Plus, we couldn't meet your salary expectations." They'd never even discussed salary with me. It was a flimsy lie. Overqualified. The word hung in the air. It wasn't a compliment. It was a dismissal. It was code for "you intimidate us," and "we don't want to pay you what a man with your resume would command." It was the last stinging paper cut. I was polite. I thanked him for his time. I hung up the phone and just sat in my car. I didn't feel the hot flash of fury I expected. This was different. It was a cold, quiet clarity. They hadn't just rejected a candidate. They had handed me a loaded gun, told me where to aim, and then turned their backs, confident I wouldn't have the nerve to do anything. But my revenge wouldn't be pulling a trigger. It would be simply walking away. My revenge would be to let their own self-inflicted wound fester. I had the cure. Driving home, I made a decision. I deleted the assessment. I deleted the credentials. I deleted every file associated with Innovatech Dynamics. And I deleted them from my conscience. My plan was simple. I would do absolutely nothing. I would let the time bomb their wizard was so proud of just keep ticking. To really get the quiet devastation of my inaction, you need to understand what that $1.3 million cloud meant. It wasn't just a server bill. That was the value of their entire digital operation. Years of development, software licenses, custom code, and the priceless data that was their lifeblood. Client lists, billing info, intellectual property, it all lived there. Losing it wouldn't be like a bank losing its website. It would be like a bank losing its vault, its money, and every record of its customers, all at once. And I knew exactly how the vault was wired to blow. My plan wasn't active. It was the strategic, deliberate withholding of life-saving information from people who proved they didn't deserve it. The beauty of it was its passivity. I didn't have to hack them. I didn't have to break a single law. I would simply let the law of cause and effect run its course. The cause was their hubris. The effect was yet to come. Let me break down the vulnerability again, because the elegance of their self-sabotage is a thing of dark beauty. First, the foundation, their broken IAM or identity and access management. A good system operates on the principle of least privilege, the #1 rule in cloud security. Innovatech had thrown this rule out for agility. They gave master keys to everyone, thinking it made them faster. It really meant a single mistake in a single place could bring the whole building down. This was the dry tinder waiting for a spark. Second, the spark itself, Mark's automated archiving and deletion protocol. The time bomb. Remember, his script had a typo. Under a very specific set of circumstances, it would look in the wrong place. This is where the magic happens. The circumstances were threefold. 1. The script had to run on the last day of the fiscal quarter. This happened 4 times a year. Predictable. 2. The main database had to be re-indexing at the exact same time. This heavy maintenance was also scheduled for the end of the quarter. This process would briefly remap directory paths, pointing the deletion script away from OLD_backups and directly at current_critical_snapshots. 3. System load had to be over 95%. This was the unpredictable part. It would only happen with a massive, unexpected surge in user activity, a huge new client, a viral marketing campaign, something to push their servers to the absolute limit. So you had a predictable event plus another predictable event that needed an unpredictable catalyst to trigger a catastrophe. An overqualified architect saw the combination and knew the danger. An arrogant tech lead like Mark saw three separate, unrelated parts of his brilliant machine. My revenge was knowing that eventually the stars would align. The dice would come up snake eyes. The end of the quarter would arrive. The reindexing would begin. And maybe, just maybe, they'd have a really good day of business. The best day of their lives, right before the end. I moved on. I took a job at a larger firm where my title was respected and my salary reflected my expertise. My new boss was a woman with 20 years of experience who saw my ambition as an asset. It was a breath of fresh air, and I was so absorbed in my new, respectful environment that I almost forgot about Innovatech. Almost. In the back of my mind, I kept a quiet calendar. I knew their fiscal quarter ended on June 30th, one of 4 days a year when the first two conditions would be met. As the day approached, a small, dark part of me hummed with anticipation. I found myself idly checking tech news, scrolling LinkedIn. I was a spectator, waiting for a show I knew was scheduled to start, but whose exact timing was out of my hands. I just had to wait for them to become victims of their own success. 6 months to the day after my final interview had happened. It was a Friday. I was wrapping up a productive week, feeling that satisfaction that comes from being appreciated for your work. My phone buzzed. It was a LinkedIn post from a former colleague who consulted for one of Innovatech's largest clients. Her post was frantic. It read, "Does anyone have a contact at Innovatech Dynamics? Their entire platform is down. All APIs unresponsive. Support lines are dead. It's like they've fallen off the face of the earth. We are completely dead in the water." My heart didn't race. It didn't pound. It settled into a slow, steady, deliberate rhythm. I closed my laptop. I sat back in my chair, the office around me fading to a dull hum. That was it. The bomb going off. I pictured the scene perfectly. End of the fiscal quarter. The sales team must have had a spectacular day, pushing the system load past 95%. Mark's flawed script executed its command. It went looking for old backups, but the reindexing process pointed it to the wrong address. With a single, silent, automated command, it began deleting the live, critical snapshots. The company's entire operational existence erased, not corrupted, not ransomed, simply, irrevocably deleted. The cascade would have begun slowly, then all at once, as the entire interconnected house of cards came tumbling down. A cold, quiet wave of satisfaction washed over me. Not glee, not joy. It was the feeling of a perfectly balanced equation finally being solved. The feeling of justice, not fiery courtroom justice, but the silent, inevitable justice of gravity. They built their tower on a foundation of arrogance, and it had at long last fallen over. I picked up my bag, walked out of my office, and into the warm evening air, free woman. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in corporate implosion. The initial silence from Innovatech was deafening. Their website was a blank error page. For 72 hours, they were a digital black hole. Then, the first press release appeared. It spoke of a cascading service failure and unexpected operational headwinds. Those of us who understood the architecture knew cascading service failure was code for everything is broken, and working around the clock meant we have no idea how to fix this. The real story was being told on anonymous tech forums like Blind. Panic posts from Innovatech employees started trickling in. It's all gone. Everything. The production database, the client instances, the snapshots. Wiped. They flew in an emergency AWS recovery team. The guy looked at the logs and basically told us to start rebuilding from scratch. Said he'd never seen anything like it. Mark was fired. His access was cut while he was panic screaming in the war room. David, the PM, was let go a week later. They're blaming malicious sabotage, but the logs show the commands came from inside the system. It was one of our own scripts. That last one was my favorite. They were looking for a phantom hacker, unable to conceive that the enemy was their own incompetence. The industry is full of breach stories, with the average cost now over $4.45 million. But those are often external attacks. Theirs was an internal, self-inflicted wound. The financial fallout was brutal. First, the direct costs: emergency consultants, failed recovery attempts, and overtime, easily hundreds of thousands of dollars. Then came the client exodus. The company whose consultant posted on LinkedIn, they terminated their 7-figure contract within a week. With their system down for weeks, Innovatech was in breach of every contract they had. The financial penalties were devastating. Finally, the reputational damage. Trust is the most valuable currency in their business. Innovatech didn't just lose data, they lost trust. They went from an industry darling to a cautionary tale. The $1.3 million figure whispered around wasn't arbitrary. It was a conservative estimate of the total damage from the rebuild, penalties, and lost revenue. The true cost, the death of their brand, was incalculable. From my new, better job, I watched it all unfold. Mark's LinkedIn profile changed from tech lead at Innovatech Dynamics to the humble, desperate green banner, #open to work. David, the manager who called me overqualified, vanished from the internet. Alan, the silent executive, was forced to step down. They were right about one thing. I was overqualified, but not for the job. I was overqualified for their disrespect. I was overqualified for their fragile, broken culture. They didn't want my expertise. They wanted my obedience. And when they didn't get it, they dismissed me, sealing their own fate. Being called overqualified, especially as a woman in tech, is a peculiar kind of insult. It's rarely about your actual qualifications. It's a convenient euphemism for, "You know more than I do, and that makes me uncomfortable," or "We want your expertise, but we won't pay for it." The irony is, they paid for my expertise anyway. They paid for it during a single 1-hour technical assessment where my overqualified eyes spotted the fatal flaw they'd been blind to for over a year. My invoice just didn't come in the form of a salary. It came 6 months later as a $1.3 million implosion. My revenge was an act of omission. I didn't hack them. I didn't plant a virus. I simply respected their decision. They told me my opinion on their architecture was not wanted. So I honored their wishes with my silence. They created a system so fragile a typo could destroy it. They fostered a culture so toxic it drove away the one person who could have saved them. And they had an arrogance so profound they searched for a saboteur, never considering the call was coming from inside the house. Recent reports show that nearly half of all cloud breaches are caused by simple human error and internal misconfigurations. Innovatech wasn't the victim of a brilliant attack. They were a statistic, a textbook case of self-destruction. They were right. I was overqualified for their arrogance, their incompetence, and their disrespect. They wanted someone to fit into their broken system. Instead, they interviewed the one person who saw exactly how it would all break. And the greatest professional satisfaction of my life was quietly watching it happen, exactly as I knew it would. Was my revenge justified? Or should I have warned them despite everything? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about arrogant bosses getting what they deserve, make sure to like and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.